In this documentary series, Kingdoms of Sumeria, we have endeavored to bring you the most interesting, mysterious, and out-of-this-world artifacts. This week's episode is packed with ancient rock crystal carvings, lost technology, ancient chemistry, and we're still in pursuit of the legacy of the Sumerians, focusing primarily this episode on the science and technology that they left us. If you haven't checked out the Patreon link yet, it's in the description. Your support really helps us to do more documentaries just like this.
The civilizations of ancient Mesopotamia brought many important advances in the areas of science and technology, both through invention and inherited knowledge. It would be almost impossible to get through a complete list, so we can only tackle the most significant, the most mysterious, and the most ingenious developments. Perhaps the most important obvious advance made by the Mesopotamians was the invention of writing by the Sumerians. With the invention of writing came the first recorded laws, called Hammurabi's Code, as well as the first major piece of literature called the Epic Tale of Gilgamesh, which we addressed in our episode, The God Kings of Mesopotamia. It might seem obvious to state, but there would be no scientific endeavors without a way to write down the complexity of data. One huge body of data that features heavily in Sumeria is mathematics. The Mesopotamians used a number system with the base 60, just like we use base 10. They divided time up by 60s, including a 60-second minute and a 60-minute hour, which we still use today. They also divided up the circle into 360 degrees. They had a wide knowledge of mathematics, including addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, quadratic and cubic equations. Incredibly, also ratio as fractions, trigonometry, and calculus. This was not just keeping track of records. This was to advance large building projects. The Mesopotamians had formulas for figuring out the circumference and area for different geometric shapes like rectangles, circles, and triangles. Some evidence suggests that they even knew the Pythagorean theorem long before Pythagoras wrote it down. They may have even discovered the number for pi in figuring the circumference of a circle.
One of the most mysterious and enigmatic Sumerian clay tablets, nicknamed Plimpton 322, is finally giving up its secrets. The analysis of this palm-sized tablet by genius mathematician Daniel Mansfield of the University of New South Wales shows not just more advancement, but that it was also much more simpler too.
If you open any history book on mathematics, it will tell you that the ancient Greeks discovered trigonometry. Our research into this Babylonian tablet is going to change all of that. Plimpton 322 is a 3,700-year-old fragment of clay from the Old Babylonian period, and it's a scientific marvel of the ancient world. We've known for decades that its unusual sequence of numbers proves that the Babylonians knew the Pythagorean theorem 1,000 years before Pythagoras was born. But while there is agreement on what the tablet contains, there's been no agreement on what it was used for. Our research shows that it's a trigonometric table, so unfamiliar and advanced that in some respects it's superior even to modern trigonometry. We've discovered that these lines represent the ratios for a series of right-angled triangles, ranging from almost a square to almost a flat line. Babylonians' unique approach to arithmetic and geometry means that this is not only the world's oldest trigonometric table, it is also the only completely accurate trigonometric table on record.
The point is, their legacy of Sumerian science could not exist without using their advanced math. The Mesopotamian astronomers were able to follow the movements of the stars, planets, and the moon. One major achievement was the ability to predict the movements of several planets. This took logic, mathematics, and an advanced scientific process. By studying the phases of the moon, the Mesopotamians created the first calendar. It had 12 lunar months and was the predecessor for both the Jewish and Greek calendars. The Babylonians made several advances in medicine. They used logic and recorded medical history to be able to diagnose and treat illnesses with various creams, ointments, and pills. The caduceus symbol, known around the world today as a medical symbol, is a remnant of this era of Sumerian medicine, as the Sumerians seen medicine as a way of prolonging life. The quest for immortality is embedded in Sumerian mythology. Medicine was seen as a practical step toward it. The libation vase of Gudea, with the dragon of Mushusu, dedicated to Ningishzida, 21st century BC short chronology. The caduceus is interpreted as depicting the god himself. In Sumerian mythology, he appears in Adappa's myth as one of the two guardians of Anu's celestial palace, alongside Dumuzi. He was sometimes depicted as a serpent with a human head. This amazing iconic symbol of the caduceus is the traditional symbol of Hermes and features two snakes winding around an often winged staff. It's often used as a symbol of medicine instead of the rod of Asclepius, especially in the United States. The two-snake caduceus design has ancient and consistent associations with trade, eloquence, negotiation, alchemy, and wisdom. Gudea of Lagash had a temple dedicated to Ningishzida, and Gudea, princely ruler of Lagash in the 21st century BC, short chronology, was one of his devotees. In the Louvre, there's a famous green steatite vase carved for King Gudea of Lagash, dedicated by its inscription. To the god Ningishzida, his god Gudea, ruler of Lagash, for the prolongation of his life, has dedicated this.
If you haven't taken a moment to check out the Patreon page, please take just a few minutes. We really do need your help to keep this documentary series going. We are a viewer-supported production. You can get involved in so many different ways. There's extra bonus material available to Patreons, and we have paid placement advert at our top slot. If you're just enjoying the show and can't afford a Patreon donation, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps us all out to deliver high-quality documentary series free from mainstream influence. And may I say, thank you.
The Mesopotamians made many technological advances. They were the first to use the potter's wheel to make better pottery. They used irrigation to get water to their crops. They used bronze metal, and later iron metal, to make strong tools and weapons, and used looms to weave cloth from wool. They utilized their science efficiently, essentially creating a technological industry for enhanced living. The walls of Babylon were once considered one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world. There were 2 massive walls that surrounded the entire city. Archaeologists estimate that the walls were over 50 miles long, with each wall being around 23 feet wide and 35 feet tall. There were also massive towers at intervals along the wall that may have been hundreds of feet tall. The Mesopotamians may have invented the simple machine called the Archimedes screw. This would have helped to raise water to the heights needed for the plants in the famous Hanging Gardens of Babylon. After the Assyrians conquered Babylon, they developed glasswork as well as glazes for pottery and art to help it last longer. We see the Assyrians immortalize the legacy of Sumerian science that was handed down through the Babylonian Empire. "18 different canals have been found that brought water to the Assyrian Empire capital of Nineveh. Whilst the kingdoms may have changed in Sumeria, Sumerian to Akkadian, then to Babylonian, followed by Assyrian, then finally by the Persians, bloodlines, kings, and dynasties may have been in turmoil, but the technology, science, and engineering always grew, morphed, or became preserved in one form or another. Which brings us to an insanely interesting artifact found in the Assyrian Empire capital of Nineveh.
Now, before we discuss the Nimrud lens, one of the most bizarre high-tech artifacts to come out of the ancient world, let's just take a moment to reflect on where it came from. As due to recent events, the place does not exist anymore. the destruction of the city of Nimrud, was in the following news clip, which may be distressing for some viewers, so please be advised.
This was once one of the most magnificent archaeological sites in the world. It was here that an Assyrian king 3,000 years ago built his palace, and many of the statues and the frescoes from that time were preserved of the highest quality. But all of it destroyed in an act of wanton barbarity, the likes of which has rarely been seen in our time, or in any other time for that matter. Destruction of idolatrous images, filming themselves smashing some of the finest artwork left to us from antiquity.
Everywhere here, wreckage of prized artifacts of the ancient capital of the Assyrian Empire, a place mentioned in the Bible.
The Nimrud lens, Nineveh lens, or layered lens, whatever its origin, as ornament, as magnifying lens, or part of a telescope, the Nimrud lens is the oldest lens in the world. Looking at it evokes mystery and wonder. It can be seen in room 55 of the British Museum, in case 9 of the Lower Mesopotamian Gallery. One possibility is that it could have been an heirloom, hence the elusive context of this mysterious artifact. The layered Nineveh lens is said to be from the period 721 to 705 BC. However, this date is based on where it was found. The Nineveh lens is a 3,000-year-old piece of rock crystal unearthed in 1853 from the throne room of King Sargon II's Assyrian palace in Nimrud, in Nineveh, Iraq. Layard discovered the lens, which is considered the first used or found plano-convex lens. There is huge debate whether the lens is ground or polished. Rock crystal is the last substance you would want to shape into a lens due to its hardness on the Mohs scale. For this reason, academics state that this lens could have been only an ornamental. It is long argued it was part of a telescope or magnifying device because of the Babylonian legacy of astronomy, the most reasonable suggestion by far. Academics refute this as they say there's no context. It might seem bizarre that academia ignores artifacts that exist, that they can touch, examine, and test because they don't like that there's nothing to go with it. That is unfortunately how it works sometimes. Is it a Babylonian heirloom? Is it a legacy of Babylonian astronomy? The extensive line of astronomical records on clay tablets stored in the British Museum, dating back to 747 BC, indicate they observed some of the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. Quoting the English Assyriologist George Rawlinson, There's said to be distinctive evidence that they observed the 4 satellites of Jupiter, and strong reason to believe that they were acquainted likewise with the 7 satellites of Saturn. A Camden professor of ancient history, he maintains, it has generally been assumed that they were wholly ignorant of the telescope. But if the satellites of Saturn are really mentioned, as it is thought that they are, upon some of the tablets, it will follow, strange as it may seem to us, that the Babylonians probably possessed optical instruments of the nature of telescopes, since it's impossible, even in the clear, vaporless sky of ancient Babylonia, to discern the faint moons of that distant planet without lenses. Simply speaking, there's huge context for this artifact, and it's largely ignored. As you'll see in the next episode, working rock crystal to intricate designs, primarily in cylinder seals, was born out of an ancient, high-tech school of engineering. It's not a question of whether this artifact exists, it's not even a question of what it was used for. It is, in fact, a lens. It's a question of context. Do we give the ancients in 700 BC the use of a lens as a telescope? That's essentially the bottom line which academia struggles with. Another perfect example of this is the 2,000-year-old Parthian battery, most likely an heirloom from a previous culture. Again, huge controversy and debate surrounds this artifact. The constant enigma is brought into play in the same style, whilst ignoring the fact that a 2,000-year-old sophisticated chemistry kit exists. The Parthians largely adopted the art, architecture, religious beliefs of previous cultures, just like the Assyrians. The Parthian rulers were titled the King of Kings, as a claim to be the heirs of the Persian Achaemenid Empire. Indeed, they accepted many local kings as vassals, where Achaemenids would have had centrally appointed. The Parthian battery was discovered in 1936. While excavating ruins of a 2,000-year-old village near Baghdad, workers discovered a mysterious small vase. A 6-inch high pot of bright yellow clay dating back 2 millennia contained a cylinder of sheet copper 5 inches by 1.5 inches. The edge of the copper cylinder was soldered with a 60-40 lead tin alloy comparable to today's solder. The bottom of the cylinder was capped with a crimped-in copper disc and sealed with bitumen or asphalt. Another insulating layer of asphalt sealed the top and held in place an iron rod suspended into the center of the copper cylinder. The rod showed evidence of having been corroded with an acidic agent. These battery came to wider attention in 1938 when Wilhelm Koenig, the German director of the National Museum of Iraq, found the object in the museum's collections. In 1940, Koenig published a paper speculating that they may have been galvanic cells, perhaps used for electroplating gold onto silver objects, a reasonable assumption. The battery, whatever its use, shows sophisticated chemistry, and its construction shows advanced use of materials, metals, and compounds in applied science. Until now, the majority have concentrated on either dispelling it or attributing what the battery powered. The most common example is the Dendera lamps theory. Few, if any, have concentrated on what it all means. It implies knowledge of chemistry, metallurgy, applied science, and a technological industry, however fundamental at the very least. The ancient battery in the Baghdad Museum, as well as those others which were unearthed in Iraq, are all dated from the Parthian occupation between 248 BCE and 226 CE. However, Dr. Koenig also found copper vases plated with silver in the Baghdad Museum, excavated from Sumerian sites in southern Iraq, dating back to at least 2500 BCE. When the vases were lightly tapped, a blue patina or film separated from the surface, which is characteristic of silver electroplated on a copper base. It would appear then that the Parthians inherited their batteries from one of the earliest known civilizations. In 1940, Willard F. M. Gray, an engineer at the General Electric High Voltage Laboratory in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, read of Koenig's theory. Using drawings and details supplied by German rocket scientist Willy Ley, Gray made a replica of the battery. Using copper sulfate solution, it generated about half a volt of electricity. In the 1970s, German Egyptologist Arne Eggebrecht built a replica of the Baghdad battery and filled it with freshly pressed grape juice, as he speculated the ancients might have done. This generated 0.87 volts. He used current from the battery to electroplate a silver statuette with gold. This experiment proved that electric batteries were used some 1800 years before their modern invention by Alessandro Volta in 1799. And even more astounding is the fact that they may have been utilized in electroplating. It also seems that the use of similar batteries can be safely placed into ancient Egypt, where several objects with traces of electroplated precious metals have been discovered at various locations.
If you haven't taken a moment to check out the Patreon page, please take just a few minutes. We really do need your help to keep this documentary series going. We are a viewer-supported production. You can get involved in so many different ways. There's extra bonus material available to Patreons, and we have paid placement advert at our top slot. If you're just enjoying the show and can't afford a Patreon donation, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps us all out to deliver high-quality documentary series free from mainstream influence. And may I say, thank you.
Electroplated objects were found in Egypt by the famous 19th century French archaeologist Auguste Mariette. Excavating at the Sphinx of Giza, Mariette came upon several artifacts at a depth of 60 feet. In the Great Universal Dictionary of the 19th century, he describes the artifacts as pieces of gold jewelry whose thinness and lightness make one believe they had been produced by electroplating, an industrial technique that we've been using for only 2 or 3 years. There are several anomalous finds in other regions, which suggests use of chemical batteries on a grander scale. Electroplating seems the most probable use, as there are tangible artifacts exhibiting this technology, and both are chemical processes. In fact, the reverse chemical process of each other, showing detailed knowledge of the anode and cathode concept. So far, academia, in a perplexing move, has settled on the ancient batteries being used in magical rituals. When we come to look at Mesopotamia metallurgy, it doesn't stand out on its own. We know from objects found like the Parthian batteries, their ornaments and artistic jewelry, they had a deep attraction to mined metals, with various applications, both artistic and technological, sometimes amalgamating the two in electroplating artifacts. The art of metallurgy soon encompassed the ability to alloy copper with other metals, resulting in a cast, hard but malleable metal we call bronze. The Bronze Age, our first metallurgical age, was also a Mesopotamian contribution to modern civilization. Much of ancient commerce was devoted to the metals trade. It also formed the basis for the development in Mesopotamia of banking and the first money, the silver shekel, weighed ingot. The many varieties of metals for which Sumerian and Akkadian names have been found and the extensive technological terminology attest to the prominent level of metallurgy in ancient Mesopotamia. For a while, this puzzled scholars because Sumer, as known, was devoid of metal ores. Yet metallurgy most definitely began there. In fact, the Indus Valley civilization may have been a Sumerian outpost for mining and trading metal ores. There are so many similarities between these cultures: brick building, irrigation, civil town planning. Known in lore as Land of Meluha, to the Sumerians the Land of Copper. Excavations uncovered the remains of highly urbanized and modern towns at Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, integrated as Indus Valley Civilization, 2800 to 2600 BC. This era is generally praised for its seals, jewelry, and town planning. Also shows great progress in metallurgical techniques of bronze, lead, arsenic bronze, and copper. Although main emphasis was on trade, but the artisans adopted several exquisite techniques to manipulate different alloys for usage in sculptures, ornaments, tools, and creative motifs, which are still being used in customized versions in various South Asian regions. The extent of the Indus Valley trade is seen in the highly controversial Haifa, Israel tin ingots, likely a Phoenician importation of an Indus Valley ingot, clearly labeled in Indus Valley script. Why did metallurgy originate in Sumeria if they didn't have ore there? The answer is energy. Smelting, refining, and alloying, as well as casting, could not be done without ample supplies of fuels to fire the kilns, crucibles, and furnaces. Mesopotamia may have lacked ores, but it had the best fuels in abundance. So the ores were brought to the fuels, which explains many early inscriptions describing the bringing of metal ores from afar. The fuels that made Sumer technologically supreme were bitumen and asphalts, petroleum products that naturally seeped up to the surface in many places. It's been shown that the surface deposits of Mesopotamia were the ancient world's prime source of fuels from the earliest times to the Roman era. There is convincing evidence to show that the use of knowledge of the fuels and their properties were greater in Sumerian times than in later civilizations. The names of bituminous and petroleum materials in other languages, Akkadian, Hebrew, Egyptian, Coptic, Greek, Latin, and Sanskrit, can clearly be traced to the Sumerian origins. For example, the most common word for petroleum, naphtha, derives from napitu, stones that flare up. The lineage of Sumerian metallurgy may have ancestry in the prehistoric citadel of Metsamor. The ancient megalithic site and metal foundry is in the country of Armenia. Metsamor is a working excavation and museum on the site of an ancient city complex with a large metallurgical and astronomical center, occupied circa 7000 BC to 17th century AD. The site occupies a volcanic hill and surrounding area. The citadel on top of the volcanic hill is about 10.5 hectares in size, but the entire city is believed to have covered 200 hectares at its greatest extent, housing up to 50,000 people. Excavations have shown strata of occupancy going back to the Neolithic period, 7000 to 5000 BC. But the most outstanding features of the site were constructed during the early, middle, and late Bronze Ages, 5000 to 2000 BC. Inscriptions found within the excavation go as far back as the Neolithic period, and a sophisticated pictograph form of writing was developed as early as 2000 to 1800 BC. The Metsamor inscriptions have a likeness to later scripts. The origins of the Eden story may very well originate in Eden. It's often called the land of Noah, and it is home to the ancient Urartu civilization, who were closely associated with the kingdoms of Sumeria. The famous Sumerian rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, originate in the Armenian highlands. Excavations began at Metsamor in 1965 and are still in progress, led by Professor Emma Kanzadian. The most recent excavation work occurred in the summer of 1996 along the inner cycloptic wall. Excavations have shown strata of occupancy going back to the Neolithic period, 7000 to 5000 BC. But the most outstanding features of the site were constructed during the early, middle, and late Bronze Ages, 5000 to 2000 BC. Inscriptions found within the excavation go as far back as the Neolithic period, and a sophisticated pictograph form of writing was developed as early as 2000 to 1800 BC. Metallurgy. The excavation has uncovered a large metal industry, including a foundry with two kinds of blast furnaces, brick and in-ground. Metal processing at Metsamor was among the most sophisticated of its kind at that time. The foundry extracted and processed high-grade gold, copper, several types of bronze, manganese, zinc, strychnine, mercury, and iron. Metsamor's processed metal was coveted by all nearby cultures and found its way to Egypt, Central Asia, and China. The iron smelting process was not advanced in Metsamor, probably due to the vast quantities of pure bronze alloys at hand, and Metsamor primarily mined and sold iron ore to neighboring cultures, which took better advantage of its properties. The foundry. The foundry dates from the early Bronze Age, circa 4000 BC, though recent digs in the area uncovered signs of metal processing as early as 5000 BC. The complex of smelting furnaces and molds date from the mid-bronze to early Iron Age, 3000 to 2000 BC. The complex becomes more astounding the more you walk through it. Several huge underground caves were uncovered that are thought to have been storehouses for base metal, as well as granaries for winter months. Stretching just below and around the upper citadel, the foundries processed copper, bronze, iron, mercury, manganese, strychnine, zinc, and gold. The first iron in the ancient world was probably forged here, though it was not considered as important as bronze, giving the jump on development to the Babylonians.
If you haven't taken a moment to check out the Patreon page, please take just a few minutes. We really do need your help to keep this documentary series going. We are a viewer-supported production. You can get involved in so many different ways. There's extra bonus material available to Patreons, and we have paid placement advert at our top slot. If you're just enjoying the show and can't afford a Patreon donation, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps us all out to deliver high-quality documentary series free from mainstream influence. And may I say, thank you.
The discovery of thousands of people buried in simple graves and large burial mounds revealed a history of Metsamor's burial rituals and a concern for hiding wealthy tombs. Like the pharaohs buried in the Valley of the Kings, Metsamor's rulers tried to thwart grave robbers by hiding the locations of royal tombs. Fortunately, the grave robbers at Metsamor were not as lucky as those in Egypt, and the mausoleums revealed intact and richly adorned burial vaults, giving us an excellent glimpse into the traditions for preparing the body for the afterlife. Among the artifacts uncovered in the royal tombs were evidences of great wealth. Gold, silver, and bronze jewelry and adornments were found over and next to the body, which was placed in a sitting fetal position in a large stone sarcophagus, early Metsamor, or lying in a casket, late Metsamor. The bodies were laid out with their feet oriented toward the east so they could greet the sun and follow it to the afterlife in the west. Other funeral objects discovered were rare amethyst bowls, ornamented wooden caskets with inlaid covers, glazed ceramic perfume bottles, and ornaments of gold, silver, and semi-precious stones, and paste decorated with traditional mythological scenes typical of local art traditions. Egyptian, Central Asian, and Babylonian objects were also found at the site, indicating that from earliest of times, Metsamor was on the crossroads of travel routes spanning the Ararat Plain and linking Asia Minor with the North Caucasus and Central Asia. By the early Iron Age, Metsamor was one of the royal towns, an administrative, political, and cultural center in the Ararat Valley. The Cyclopean Walls. The walls date from the 2nd millennium BC, when the site was fortified during the Urartian era. These stone blocks average 20 tons in weight and are more than 3 meters thick in places. During the Middle Bronze period, late 3rd to mid-2nd millennium BC, there was a surge of urban growth and development of complex architectural forms which extended the boundaries of the settlement to the area below the hill. Basically, that area within the inner Cyclopean walls are the older city, and that beyond represents newer areas. By the 11th century BC, the central city occupied the lowlands stretching from Lake Acna and covered 100 hectares or 247 acres. The history of astronomy and astrology at Metsamor. The astronomical observatory predates all other known observatories in the ancient world. That is, observatories that geometrically divided the heavens into constellations and assigned them fixed positions and symbolic design. Until the discovery of Metsamor, it had been widely accepted that the Babylonians were the first astronomers. The observatory at Metsamor predates the Babylonian kingdom by 2,000 years and contains the first recorded example of dividing the year into 12 sections. Using an early form of geometry, the inhabitants of Metsamor were able to create both a calendar and envision the curve of the earth. It should be no surprise to anyone who knows something of Armenia's history that astronomy is such an important part of the national character. Sun symbols, signs of the zodiac, and ancient calendars predominated the region, while the rest of the world was just coming alive, culturally speaking. Egypt and China were still untamed wilderness areas when the first cosmic symbols began appearing on the side of the Gagama mountain range around 7000 BC. At Metsamor, circa 5000 BC, one of the oldest observatories in the world can be found. It sits on the southern edge of the excavated city, a promontory of red volcanic rocks that juts out like the mast of a great ship into the heavens. Between 2800 and 2500 BCE, at least 3 observatory platforms were carved from the rocks. The Metsamor Observatory is an open book of ancient astronomy and sacred geometry. For the average visitor, the carvings are indecipherable messages. The discovery of the astronomical observatory at Metsamor and the presence of engravings which have been speculatively called zodiac creatures has given credence to the assertion that the ancient figures of the constellations were probably created by ancient peoples living in the Euphrates Valley and near Mount Ararat in eastern Anatolia and Armenia. The Metsamorians were a trade culture. For trade, you must have astronomy to know how to navigate. The numerous inscriptions found at Metsamor puzzled excavators, as indecipherable as they were elaborate. Hundreds of small circular bowls were carved on the rock surfaces, connected by thin troughs and indented lines. But one stood out. It's an odd-shaped design that was a mystery to the excavators of the site, until Professor Parsmanian discovered it was a key component to the large observatory complex. By taking a modern compass and placing it on the carving, Parsmanian found that it pointed due north, south, and east. It was one of the first compasses used in ancient times. Another carving on the platform shows 4 stars inside a trapezium. The imaginary end of a line dissecting the trapezium matches the location of star, which gave rise to Egyptian, Babylonian, and ancient Armenian religious worship. The observatory rivals the discoveries at the Citadel for importance, substantiating theories on the birthplace of the zodiac and origins of astronomy in the ancient world. Dated circa 2800 to 2500 BC, when a zodiac is figured to have been concluded, the observatory was also the primary religious site and navigation center for the Metsamorian culture. The Metsamorian worship of Sirius. Sirius is most probably the star worshipped by the ancient inhabitants of Metsamor between 2800 and 2600 BCE. Sirius could have been observed from Metsamor in the rising rays of the sun. It's possible that, like the ancient Egyptians, the inhabitants of Metsamor related the first appearance of Sirius with the opening of the year. Those wanting to plot the same event from Metsamor will have to wait a while. Sirius now appears in the winter sky, while the inhabitants of Metsamor observed it in the summer. Because of the Earth's rotation within the rotation of the Milky Way galaxy, stars change their positions over time. In another 4,000 years or so, Sirius will again appear as it is plotted on the Metsamor stellar map. The Metsamorians also left behind a calendar divided into 12 months and made allowances for the leap year. Like the Egyptian calendar, which had 365 days, every 4 years the Metsamorians had to shift Sirius rising from one day of the month to the next. With respect to Metsamor, whether it was the original homeland of the Sumerians or not, Metsamor had all the elements that the Sumerians had: metallurgy, astronomy, astrology, and script writing. You could put the origins of Eden there, of which there is tantamount circumstantial evidence, and it fits very well. At one point, Armenia, original homeland or not, became a Sumerian outpost in the Urartu culture, just like the Indus Valley and just like Egypt. Mesopotamia was situated in the center of all three, absorbing minerals and trade to feed its flourishing civilizations. The kingdoms of Sumeria chose Mesopotamia as its epicenter. Just like the lapis lazuli they imported from vast distances, metal ores were no different. The kingdoms of Sumeria truly traded on an epic scale.